the closest look that anyone in the West has had of this Soviet weapon in action. Its task is seek and destroy.
Most of the men here have been involved in fighting the Russians. Each owner of a Kalashnikov, or 3, will tell you he took it from a dead Russian soldier.
President Carter's statement, in the view of most observers here, effectively ends any chance of American athletes appearing at the Moscow Olympics.
And we are quite right to advise the British Olympic Committee not to send a team to Moscow.
They're trying to stop us going to the games. And that appears to be the only weapon in the government's armory against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
With formidable efficiency, the Soviets have ringed the entire Olympic village with 5 separate layers of protection. Outside the wire mesh barrier at 100-yard intervals, soldiers armed with the latest model Kalashnikov rifles.
Two-thirds of the oil of the free world comes from the Persian Gulf, and all of it goes through the Straits of Hormuz. Soviet troops are now less than 400 miles from those straits.
We cannot allow Saudi Arabia's oil to come into hostile or undependable hands.
In the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, the biggest of several special refugee camps which have been set up to house the ever-increasing number of Afghan refugees.
Many of the children have bronchitis and not a few TB.
These men told me the Russians bombed their village with poison gas.
Are you killing them?
Sure, people are killing them in this Kabul city. And you can find the dead body of a Russian soldier in a garbage.
Western sources are predicting a long, drawn-out guerrilla war for which the Soviet army, with its emphasis on blitzkrieg tactics, could be totally unprepared.
Five miles east of the capital city, where what life there is seems to have returned to normal, Russian troops have been busy digging in on the hills and ridges that mark the approaches to the rugged Kabul pass. Trenches for troops, gun emplacements for heavy artillery, pointing not just at the mountains but back at Kabul itself. A vivid illustration of both the strength and insecurity of the Soviet force here. The few Russian officers I met who said they'd all volunteered for this assignment confessed that they hated the country and thought Kabul an ugly city. Like all soldiers fighting on foreign soil, they missed their homeland. Intriguingly, one asked me what the London Times was saying about their presence here, and laughed when I explained I didn't know because it wasn't on sale in Afghanistan. As the British once learned to their cost, outside military forces are not particularly popular with the average Afghan. So the Russians confine their travel here to military vehicles of one kind or another. Those with any spare time stay firmly in their camps, especially since about a dozen Soviet technicians in plain clothes were savagely murdered in various incidents in the bazaars during the last 12 days. Well, those friendly Russians we met, in fact, came back and arrested us for filming, confiscating all our equipment. Along with UPITN cameraman Klaus Bratt, I was ordered into the scout car and hemmed in by a large Russian soldier and his AK-47 automatic rifle. We bounced for 3 hours around Kabul, looking, as the major with us explained, for the Soviet embassy. We never found it, but had in the process a most interesting guided tour of the Russian army bases in Kabul. Through the periscope-type windows with their image-intensifying glass that makes dusk almost as bright as day, We saw both the hardiness of the Russian soldiers and his seemingly haphazard organization. Tents were pitched erratically. At least one platoon were cooking their meal on an open fire set in a broken pyramid of stones. As there were no set tracks, we just drove in and out of tents where the rugged terrain of ice and mud allowed. Back on the road, we stopped several times to ask the way. And eventually, we suggested politely that we go back to our hotel and ask instructions from the doorman. When we got back there, the Major suddenly decided that we were free to go. The incident, for us, verged on black comedy. But for two of our colleagues who were arrested with us, NBC producer David Phillips and ITN cameraman Derek Seymour, it was a rather different story, as Derek Seymour explains. So, Derek, what happened?
Well, after we lost Stu, we drove around Kabul for about an hour and a half, aimlessly going from place to place, same as yourself, and we suddenly ended ourselves up in the Ministry of the Interior. They took us in there, they were quite kind to us, and then started asking us a lot of questions and making written statements.
How long did they question you for?
5.5 hours.
And kept you in overnight?
Yes, they brought a little bed, put it in the corner of the room, and said, you sleep there. We slept overnight, and of course we didn't know where you were, we were quite worried about yourself. And then eventually they released us at midday the following day and said, you can just go. And off we went.
Did they give you anything to eat or drink?
Yes, they just gave us some bread and some chai, local tea, no milk or sugar. It's quite acceptable there, quite warm.
And generally they were very polite and treated you well?
They treated us quite well, overall, yes.
The Russian push is now said to have put them firmly in control of 3 more cities here, and they seem to be preparing for a long stay. The signs are that the weight of Western diplomatic criticism and pressure outside Afghanistan could combine with continuing resistance within it to ensure that that stay will not be an easy one. Martin Lewis, ITN, Kabul, Afghanistan.
For the first 24 hours, we travelled the old camel routes that once led to Kabul and beyond to the east. It was a mile or so off the track that we found the desert camp inside Afghanistan, where the leader of the main guerrilla group in the western sector of the country had made his base. As we sat in his simple Bedouin tent, he told of the war with the Russians. To him, no new battle born of the massive Soviet invasion, but a war which has now been raging for nearly a year. Outside, the guerrilla leader handled a 60-year-old rifle, which represents the standard weapon available to his forces. He is, in fact, a former 2-star general who commanded the Afghan Air Force in the west of the country. He left the armed forces after the first pro-Soviet coup 20 months ago. As he left us for prayers, he said his primary motivation for his fight with the Russians was the desire for a free Afghanistan, a country in which the practice of Islam would be sacrosanct. These people are Sunni Muslims, more reserved than their Shiite brethren in neighbouring Iran, but the age-old faith in Islam is central to their way of life. We were to travel now for more than 300 miles in search of the rebel forces. A captured Russian army truck was our transport, bucketing over the first range of mountains before coming down onto the once fertile plains beyond. At dawn on our second day, we began to observe a pattern repeated throughout. Every village and town we approached, totally deserted. The last of the Afghan farmers had fled from here 6 months before, after repeated machine gun and bomb attacks from Soviet planes. The guerrillas claimed that the Russians had been systematically bombarding these villages for more than 9 months, and that now their populations were refugeed on the Iranian border. Little nests of mud-built houses smashed in low-flying machine gun attacks. Meagre possessions left scattered in their wake. And further on, just one house bombed, a signal to the people to get out. Just an abandoned town cat, witness to the fact that only 2 months ago this town was inhabited. The terrain the guerrillas have to move across in these winter months is treacherous. Frequently we toiled to free the truck from the soaked desert ground. The Russians control the surfaced roads, so the guerrillas must move on truckless routes, with the constant risk of detection from Soviet aircraft above. We found the guerrillas eventually at night, and in the day they came to the mouth of their valley to greet us. No one had ever come from outside to see them, and they were overwhelmed that people from beyond their borders might care. Across the rock-strewn valley floor, we came first to their tented advance camp. It was early morning, and the Afghans were drinking tea and chattering excitedly. A large contingent had just left for an attack on a Russian convoy travelling on the main road 5 miles beyond their valley. Others were making bread for the day. They have to be entirely self-sufficient. As they laid the loaves around the fireside, their feet beyond, bound in makeshift shoes made from tires and cloth, emphasized how crudely provisioned this determined force is in the face of the Soviet military might. From the base camp, we climbed higher up the valley to the points at which men were in contact with their colleagues beyond, who could see the Russian positions. The valley is set between 2 Russian outposts, Shindand, an airbase, and Farah, a military barracks. From a secondary camp high in the rock face, men kept watch on the opposite side of the valley. Hundreds of feet above them, other men clambered across the mountainside with supplies and messages. With no radios, they bellowed information from one section of the valley to the next. 2 lookouts on the top of the valley could see the attack on the Russian convoy far below on the other side. The guerrillas knocked out 2 trucks from 15. The convoy had been moving down the main road to Kandahar. This side of the valley, there was a call. Were reinforcements needed? It seemed not. The clatter of gunfire from the other side, almost swallowed up in the rocks, pinpointed the engagement. The guerrillas claimed several Russians dead. They take no prisoners. They have killed every Russian they've ever captured. As they cooked food for the returning guerrillas, they would say little of their own casualties, save that they are prepared to die. They shoot at Russian convoys from positions of no cover, taking the Russians by surprise, but often dying in the aftermath. On 4 instances, they claim they have destroyed tanks by drenching themselves in petrol, setting fire to themselves, and then jumping onto the engine casing or into the tank turrets in order to burn the machines out. At regular intervals, the men that are left in the valley are summoned for new orders. As they assemble, it's evident that they are primitively armed, some with weapons used in wars against the British in the last century. What modern weapons they have are captured from the Russians. All colonizing forces have met with great resistance from the Afghans down the years. The Russians are no exception. For the moment, they are meeting with determined resistance from these guerrillas. In this area alone, there are 3 more bases like this one from which daily attacks are carried out. It was their failure to cope with these repeated attacks that forced the Russians to invade officially. There is evidence in the east of the country that the Soviets are now trying to gas the guerrillas out of these valleys.
These people have no faith that the United Nations can do anything, neither do they want anyone to intervene on their behalf. What they do need are more weapons and medical supplies, and urgently. They need them now in order to prevent the Russians consolidating their position. But it's most unlikely that anybody can get them weapons or medical supplies soon enough. John Snow, News at 10, with the partisans in the Afghanistan mountains.
They watched and waited anxiously for the first sign of the prisoners, numbers growing until they were several thousand strong. and all the while listening to and occasionally cheering speeches from Nizamuddin Tazi, a leading member of the Central Communist Committee here. Meanwhile, deep inside the huge complex, prisoners had begun filing out into one of the cell block yards, clutching their few permitted possessions and looking, on the surface at least, fit and well. Then suddenly the inner gates were open, and they streamed out, stumbling and running for that long-awaited reunion with those who didn't yet know whether these people were alive or dead. This was one of those rare days when the firm, rugged mask of the Afghan nation collapsed in a flood of emotion. There were sobs of relief as a family greeted the father they hadn't seen for 2 years. Tears of hope as a 14-year-old boy searched in vain for his brother. Hugs and kisses as an Afghan soldier bumped into an old friend. And a woman, face distorted by tears, who ran down the road desperately seeking news of her husband. "Have you seen him? Is he alive?" Shrugged shoulders, a shake of the head, and she plunged on further into the steady stream of prisoners. It was noticeable that not all the prisoners were released today. Some were left waving hopefully from their cell windows. So many of those waiting outside would have done so in vain, which led to some observers describing this as just a propaganda exercise. Whether that's true or not, it would have been difficult to fake the emotion on display here. And if Russia is trying to win the hearts and minds of more Afghans, as well as influence world opinion, this could be described as a fair try. But they've still a long, long way to go. Martin Lewis, News at 10, Policharki Prison, Afghanistan.
Yeah, a little bit faster.
Soldiers have surrendered all their heavy weapons, their tanks are without shells, and heavy guns in the mountains are said to be zeroed in on the Afghan army bases. Russian civilians are reported to be posted in every ministry, and Western sources are predicting a long, drawn-out guerrilla war for which the Soviet army, with its emphasis on blitzkrieg tactics, could be totally unprepared. Martin Lewis, ITN, Kabul, Afghanistan. The mist made it difficult to see the full extent of Wednesday morning's airlift, but for several hours the skies above Kabul were filled with a drone of helicopters and other aircraft. Eyewitnesses at the airport said military transports of the same kind that arrived before and during the coup were landing all morning in batches of 2 or 3, bringing in supplies and more Russian troops, but they couldn't say just how many. The airlift followed a day when Russian military equipment had suddenly begun to rumble more openly through the streets of Kabul. These Soviet tanks, along with artillery, were leaving Afghan army headquarters and heading due east along a route that travellers from Pakistan say has seen little fighting in the last few days. Western diplomatic sources say the Red Army here is now approaching twice the strength of the Afghan army itself, thought to be a mere 65,000 strong, plagued by desertions from almost every unit, and now demoralised and largely disarmed. It's thought the Russians now need to strengthen their grip on the major cities and prepare themselves for the next phase of fighting in the countryside, where live the 2/3 of the population which, according to Western experts, they do not control. Those experts argue that the Babrak Karmal regime is even less credible and less popular than Amin's, and is actively supported by only 5% of the population. That could be one reason why the Russians now have no less than 6 base camps scattered around the capital, and it's believed their immediate aim is to consolidate and control the new regime. As for any covetous glances the Russian bear might make towards Iran or Pakistan, well, Western diplomats here don't think that's in its mind just now. But, said one, in 10 years' time, that's another story. Martin Lewis, News at 10, Kabul, Afghanistan.
Oil is the key, for Oman sits beside the narrow route the great tankers take to and from the producing states of the Persian Gulf. What if the narrow passage were cut off? For Oman's neighbor across the mountains is South Yemen, with its Russian ships in Aden harbor. Oman's own sea defenses are limited. We saw police boats in Muscat harbor, and there are bigger boats which patrol the straits. Defense, of course, came up at the Al Ghubra guest house, where Lord Carrington began his talks. He was met by the foreign minister of Oman, who later said that he did not believe the Russians would merely sit in Afghanistan, but would press on to the Arabian Sea to the south. So, said the minister, Britain could help with more arms and help with military training. There are already nearly 600 British officers here. That Oman is not short of the cash to pay for them was apparent from the scale of the Sultan's palace. Lord Carrington met Sultan Qaboos for private talks for 2 hours. Outside, a group of folk dancers with their own form of defense. Michael Brunson, ITN, in Oman. Lord Carrington has come to Saudi Arabia because it's perhaps the most influential state in the Middle East. He's been seeing all the most influential people. The greater part of his time has been spent with Prince Saud, who looks younger than 39, went to university at Princeton in America, and speaks perfect English, which he employed to some effect to tell Lord Carrington that after Afghanistan, the West could help most by giving Middle East countries like his the military equipment and assistance that they asked for. A clear reference to the fact that in the past the West has carefully weighed the effect on Israel of such military deals. Prince Saud told me why he looks to a joint Middle East-Western reaction to what's happened in Afghanistan.
Small countries in this part of the world. We are not part of the East-West confrontation or the balance or the polarity of the balance of the East-West. But still, I think even small countries have rights in this world. We will stand for our rights together with our brother Muslim countries and the Third World. And we hope that the Western countries, regardless whether they are on the opposite camp of the Soviet Union, will also stand for right and justice in this case.
Lord Carrington also went to see King Khalid of Saudi Arabia, more of a formal visit this, since the king tends to leave the running of the country to his brother, Crown Prince Fahad. Several other princes were there too, underlining the fact that the Saudis have regarded this visit with considerable importance. So has Lord Carrington. He clearly wants to take the lead in organising a stiff and, if possible, worldwide reaction to the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Not to do so, he feels, would be as bad as the appeasement of Hitler, which led to World War II. And in this, countries like Saudi Arabia are important. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Riyadh.
How nice to see you again, too.
Your Excellency, you speak Arabic? The ambassador speaks Arabic.
Not me, alas, no.
You don't? The ambassador speaks good Arabic. Queen.
She very well indeed, and still remembers with great pleasure her visit to Saudi Arabia, which she was telling me about the other day.
إنها بخير والحمد لله ولا تزال تذكر.
problems right. And one thing is
Lord Carrington is presumably a good listener, for people have been talking at him non-stop for over a week now. The latest, our ambassador in Afghanistan, who's been withdrawn for consultations, which means he's been pulled out to show Britain's displeasure. Mr. Hillier Fry gave the Foreign Secretary a full rundown at the embassy in Islamabad, before Lord Carrington swept away for yet more talks, mostly with the Pakistani Foreign Minister. The Pakistanis have not asked for any specific help from Lord Carrington. That'll probably come first from the Americans. The President, General Zia, explained when we met him that what he wants much more from Lord Carrington is a clear understanding of how the balance of power has shifted following Afghanistan and of the danger that that causes to his country.
If he can understand that, and if Britain is able to comprehend the way we comprehend, or the way the rest of the world, I hope, comprehends, then I think our aim is served.
You're saying that Lord Carrington is going to play a sort of Dr. Kissinger role, are you?
Well, why shouldn't he? Isn't he the Secretary of State of Great Britain? And above all, I think you ought to know he's a very lucky foreign minister. We hope he can play an equally important role, what he did in Rhodesia. In this part of the world, not so much as a peacemaker that I'm thinking of, but as an influential foreign minister in this part of the world, seeing as to what should be done in this area.
Part of the whole problem is Pakistan's poverty. There are £1,000 million in debt on their balance of payments. Then there's the problem of General Zia himself. Following the execution of Mr. Bhutto and the cancelling of elections, the General's position is far from secure. What mob violence can do here is plainly visible at what remains of the American embassy, which was sacked during the siege of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, which rumours said the Americans had organised. And down the road, watching all this, the Russian embassy, with a staff 3 times the size of the British embassy.
Welcome to Pakistan.
nice to see you.
The question of subversion by the Russians is something Lord Carrington sees as a real danger in every one of the countries he's been to. So despite the initial friendly banter, there was serious talk about Russian subversion, backdoor invasion some call it, when the Foreign Secretary met General Zia for their talks. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Islamabad. General Zia, the President of Pakistan, says that his country is now the new buffer state with the Russians. And here you can see why. That's the frontier with Afghanistan, and beyond there is all controlled now by the Russians. Lord Carrington came to see for himself where the buffer begins, deep in the Khyber Pass on the northwest frontier. This is nomad country where the tribesmen cross and recross by mountain tracks between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, however, thousands of them have crossed into Pakistan to stay, not just because of the recent Russian invasion, but because of the war that was already underway between the government in Kabul and the rebels. They're strict Muslims, the women still in purdah, kept well out of our sight. But we saw the children, hundreds of them, some of them plainly not too well. The Refugee Commissioner says that many of them have bronchitis and not a few TB. And the main problem is food. It's not critical yet, but Pakistan says it needs help. Lord Carrington heard all this direct as he sat with the tribal elders. And then he went to see for himself, and he was visibly shaken by being shown at one tent a small child with polio.
The ground is damp, sir, so he...
The contrast with the governor's house in Peshawar could hardly have been greater, but it was there that Lord Carrington talked about his trip through 5 countries. Had anything really come of it?
I don't think one should expect dramatic things to come out of these visits, but when I get home I shall of course have the opportunity not only to talk to my colleagues, but also to talk to my European colleagues. Before I came here, I talked to 1 or 2 of them on the telephone and said I was doing this, and promised to keep them informed about what's happening. So I think it's very useful that we should know what's happening, and I really don't think it's quite very sensible to suppose that as a result some immediate solution to the problems of the world are going to arise, because they don't.
The final stop, India, and an important meeting with Mrs. Gandhi, back at the head of a government which has a formal treaty of friendship with Moscow. It was a fairly frosty meeting too, with Mrs. Gandhi saying that she and Lord Carrington agreed on the dangers resulting from Afghanistan.
I don't think any country is justifying in entering any other country.
But disagreed about how to handle them. Asked if she'd give more detail, she simply said no.
I don't think we've supported it.
Michael Brunson, News at 10,
We're just
Delhi.
trying to find a way
The first hint that Afghanistan might be taking action against American journalists came on Wednesday night, when several policemen arrived at Kabul's main hotel and demanded that all Americans hand over their passports for the night. CBS correspondent Tom Fenton, who was first in line, refused, and the full weight of the Western media descended on the bewildered officers, who retired behind the hotel reception to phone for further instructions. Next on the scene, 2 American embassy counselors who went in to talk to the police. Minutes later, the police emerged, mysteriously attempting to hide their heads under a blanket, a guise which prevented them from tackling the hotel's revolving doors. A frustrated officer lashed out at the unyielding circle of lights and cameras before returning for more talks with the men from the American embassy. The next morning saw the police back outside the hotel with rather clearer instructions. Exit visas were to be issued immediately to all American journalists, who were forbidden to leave the hotel until the time came for their flight out of the country. It's being pointed out that President Babrak Karmal recently extended a warm hand of friendship to the Ayatollah Khomeini in neighbouring Iran, and it may well be that he feels there is some diplomatic mileage to be gained from following Iran's example in expelling the American journalists. Martin Lewis, News at 10, Kabul, Afghanistan.
We cut out a thing like the disappointment one. We could do the others more fully. Are you happy with that?
Perfectly.
Well done.
Perfectly.
We'll do the best for the rest.
We're rolling now. Rolling? Okay,
right.
We lived through the rape of Czechoslovakia, and now we watched, unable to stop it, the rape of another country, unable to defend itself. It is a quite appalling situation where one nation can do that on another. Almost the whole civilized world cries out in opposition, and yet it's not stopped. No, I don't repent of having spoken in the Abbey about that very strongly.
Sir, finally, there is, I think, a feeling in the world now of anxiety, of fear, if you will, of what is happening, the events of Afghanistan, of which you've spoken, of Iran, things like that. Do you share that fear?
You cannot do otherwise. I said in the Abbey last night that the cosmic powers of evil are a very real entity with which we have to come to terms. Of course one shares that fear. One cannot, as a Christian, be a pessimist, because one knows as a Christian that in the long run, right will prevail and God reigns. But we live and work and wrestle in the interim period, and the forces against us, the forces of darkness, are very strong.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I'm most grateful.
Was that
sir.
all right?
Absolutely perfect.
Well done.
President Carter's statement, in the view of most observers here, effectively ends any chance of American athletes appearing at the Moscow Olympics. No one expects Russian troops to withdraw from Afghanistan within the next month, and though officially the United States Olympic Committee say they will take a poll of American athletes before reaching a decision, it's considered inconceivable here that they would sponsor a team to Moscow against the express wishes of the president. Mr. Carter's viewpoint has already received widespread support. Several world-class American athletes are organizing a petition against competing in Moscow, and the boycott has also been endorsed by most of the Republican presidential candidates. Even the president's arch-rival, Senator Edward Kennedy, who previously argued against a boycott, changed his mind today and gave the president his grudging support.
With a severe winter starting to cover the higher parts of Afghanistan, there is speculation as to who will benefit most from the snow and sub-zero temperatures. As might be expected, the Russians seem to be taking it in their stride, with Western diplomatic sources suggesting that they are consolidating their positions by bringing in more of their regular troops to replace the reservists who made up about a third of the original force. For the rebels, it's undoubtedly tougher. They might find it difficult to whip up sizable support among local people for any prolonged military action in weather like this. so hit-and-run tactics must be their best bet. Neither the snow nor the military have yet stopped communication by road. Some routes are out of bounds, but heavily laden old buses and lorries, occasionally with Afghan army escorts, still ferry people and goods across country on most routes. While in some towns the inhabitants have shut up shop and withdrawn to their homes in protest at the Russian presence, life in the capital, Kabul, with its population of 500,000, assumes an air of normality. Apart from the occasional convoy, the Russians remain well in the background, behind the walls of the People's Palace, the old fort, or various government buildings. And the primitive trade and barter of the 25th poorest country in the world carries on virtually unhindered, although showing signs of missing its regular supply of tourists. On the religious front, despite the obvious ideological differences, the new government is going out of its way to try and portray itself as a friend of Islam. It's praised the Ayatollah Khomeini and is preparing a drastic slowdown in reforms such as the education of women, which offended so many followers of the faith under the old regime. And the Russians may well be gambling that Islam is more controllable, less of a threat here than it might seem elsewhere. Observers who've studied the Afghan character for many years say that although a foreign military presence has always aroused patriotic anger, a general uprising based on religion seems out of the question at this stage. Tribal differences are more important than national unity. All communities have their own mosques, but there is little contact between them. There is no great national religious shrine as in Iran, and certainly no awe-inspiring religious leader such as the Ayatollah Khomeini. The mainly Sunni Muslims here come from a different rival sect to those in Iran, so the Russians probably reckon that, politically at least, their involvement here is a calculated risk well worth taking as part of their long-term plan to portray themselves as the friends of Islam and the West the enemy. Martin Lewis, ITN, Kabul, Afghanistan.
At the far stony foot of the Khyber Pass, the frontier is ceremonial rather than defensive. It's open in daylight hours, and on the Pakistani side, the main weapon to keep the Russians out appears to be a Lee Enfield 303 rifle. The Afghans have their AK-47s, and while they were suspicious of us, they're pretty friendly towards the locals. There is much toing and froing, and it's only after a while that you realize more people are entering Pakistan than leaving it. They bring in vast burdens under the incurious eyes of the Khyber police. Sometimes the people are contemplating a long stay. The refugee traffic is discreet but constant. Nearly 500,000 Afghans have crossed into Pakistan, and the flow does not appear to be slowing down. Their presence may be a political embarrassment down in Islamabad, but here the Pathan tribes straddle the border, and there is nothing but sympathy for the Afghans. But of course, business is business. So along the old wall sit the money changers, ready with Pakistani rupees, offered at a rate which is only slightly inflationary. Then the journey to the refugee camps begins, up over the pass in one of the most hostile terrains in the world. The idea of a Russian hot pursuit of Afghan rebels here is a nonsense, of course. The Khyber has always been its own defense and always will be. But the reality of the camps on the plain near Peshawar is harsh and inhospitable. There are only tents for protection against the chill wind and the cold mountain nights. Each head of family must weigh out his supply of wood for fuel. It's not much to burn through the long night, and it has to be used for cooking too. The latrines are behind piles of straw, and an old dog who's seen better days guards his master's tent nearby. There seems little but the consolation of religion. The mosque is improvised, a flattened mud floor, low mud walls. But it is a mosque, so the worshippers must remove their shoes. So the faithful pray, oblivious of the elders of the tribe who use the mosque as a place to argue over living conditions. As well they might, for how long will they have to stay here with the mountain wind blowing in someone else's country? Anthony Carthew, News at 10, in the Khyber Pass.
The moment Russian civilians arrive at Kabul airport, they're set apart. They don't have to pass through any customs formalities, and they have a separate exit all to themselves. And from the moment they set foot in the city of Kabul, their influence spreads, so that it is not an exaggeration to say the Russians are running the Afghan government. The Russians have taken over the Kabul Hotel, a sombre off-yellow building just outside the bazaar area. The top Russians, like this group, work in the governmental ministries, 2 to a ministry, and there are 19 ministries. No decision at any level of government can be taken without the approval of the Russian advisors. I asked this group if we could film them at breakfast. At the time they said yes, but we had no sooner taken these shots than we were detained by the Afghans. The majority of the 4,000 Russian advisors are behind these gates in what is now called the People's House, from where they run the country through the government of Mr. Babrak Karmal. And this is one of the few places left in Kabul where you can still see Russian soldiers on guard. The Prime Minister, Mr. Karmal, has not moved outside this building since the Russians moved in, and there is no indication yet that the Russians intend letting him. John Suchet, News at 10, in Kabul, Afghanistan.
When war comes to a place, it often happens that one man's misery becomes another man's profit. Well, here in Dara on the northwest frontier, they deal very profitably in death, for this is the street of 1,000 gunsmiths. Or maybe a lot more than 1,000, for this whole village is devoted to the manufacture of arms. For 100 years now, these cheerful-looking souls have been providing the means for the masses of Pathan tribesmen to kill each other and a succession of foreigners, notably the British. Now it could be the Russians' turn. In these workshops around the courtyard of the mosque, they toil away at making exact replicas of British, American, Czech and Russian weapons. They're so good, even arms dealers can't tell the difference, and the shopkeepers are proud of their work. With very little persuasion, you can get a rundown of the stock in Mr. Haji's shop.
This one's Stradler.
Yeah. How much is that?
Take a check a week. 1,600 rupees.
1,600 rupees.
Yes. Shooting position.
Shooting position. In addition, there are several lines, presumably for tourists with a homicidal tendency. Like walking stick guns.
Turn that round for the trigger.
Yeah. When a customer is serious, he's allowed to try his chosen weapon and requested to fire in the air. Actually, this customer turned out to be rather special. You buy for Afghanistan?
Yes.
How much do you pay for that
gun? 2,000.
2,000?
Yes, different quality. 2,000, 3,000.
And how many have you bought? Have you bought many guns?
Yes.
For Afghanistan?
Yes, many guns.
How many?
About 30,000.
30,000?
Yes.
That's a lot of rupees. Where does the money come from?
This come America.
From America?
Yes. Saudi Arab.
And Saudi?
Yes, and China, Japan, every country, yes.
All in all, it was apparently a very good day for business. So the shopkeepers, a little self-consciously, fired off a salvo in celebration. Anthony Carthew, News at 10, in Dara on the northwest frontier.
Perched on the top of a hill in splendid isolation just outside Kabul, the Intercontinental Hotel, unofficial centre for the world's press, and therefore to the Russians, who are used to controlling their press absolutely, a source of a constant headache. It's a headache they are beginning to cure. Halfway up the hill to the hotel, one solitary town taxi, whereas a week ago there would be perhaps a dozen. These town taxi drivers are under instructions not to take the press as passengers. And an indication of how sensitive the authorities are to television cameras, this man from the Ministry of the Interior has been assigned to the hotel and is under instructions not to let anybody film anything sensitive, and that includes town taxis. These taxis are rather more lucky. They belong to a company called Afghan Tours, which is run by the government. All Afghan tour drivers have been instructed not to take journalists to any sensitive areas, to monitor what television crews film, and report back to the government if they're suspicious. As we filmed, we could hear distant gunfire in the hills behind the city. Nobody's really sure why the world's press were allowed into Afghanistan in the first place. The speculation here is that the Afghan authorities deliberately cocked a snook at the Russians and let the press in. But now the Russians are beginning to reassert their control. This sign in the hotel lobby warns journalists of the penalties of not obeying the rules. John Suchet, News at 10, in Kabul, Afghanistan. These people will never make the Lake Placid Winter Olympics. But what do you do when you're a diplomat based in Afghanistan and you find that suddenly you can't travel anywhere? You improvise.
Ladies sing.
The slope is the first fairway at the Kabul Golf Club. One of the rewards of living in Afghanistan is that in winter it snows and snows and snows, turning the hills into ski runs which rank with the best in the European Alps. The trouble is, those slopes are way out of town, and the only people likely to be enjoying them now are the Russian soldiers. The current champion is Richard Webb, a Welshman, who is archivist at the British Embassy. His best time so far, 18.6 seconds. I'm told 19.6 seconds, I'm told. It would appear your lead has slipped.
Has it? Oh dear. Try harder next time. Oh, it's easier going down than coming up. It's a sure fact.
In the men's doubles, an attaché from the British Embassy climbs on top of an Orthodox Church missionary from Albania. There are Britons here, Canadians, Americans, Australians, Swedes, Germans, Irish, all stuck in the capital of a beautiful country and no longer able to get out and see it. John Suchet, News at 10, on the slopes of Kabul, Afghanistan.
Mr. Lunkoff, presumably you agree with Lord Killannin, who says that the Winter Olympics have proved we can do something to contribute to international understanding.
Yes, I think he is completely right. Because, you know, Olympic Games, it's one of the oldest, noblest, and most sacred traditions in the world. And especially when we speak about this human contact. And therefore, this Winter Olympic Games, they confirm this, that the Olympic Games bring people closer together. It's what just we want to have.
Lord Killannin, however, went on to say, if we can come together, we may avoid the Holocaust, which otherwise may be upon us. Now, do you think that that is putting it too strongly?
No, you know, of course, now it's a purpose and the goal of all the politicians and leaders. And I am deeply convinced about our Soviet position. Of course, we should do everything in our power to avoid this terrible prospects, and therefore we are standing so firmly for this policy of detente, because you know there is no reasonable alternative to this policy. If you go further, it will mean only the so-called co-destruction. But we would like to hope that this common sense would prevail.
If the United States don't go to Moscow, and it looks as if they won't, will it be the end of détente?
Oh, you know, it's very, 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 very...
Is it back to the Cold War?
No, you know, first of all, I think if we speak so seriously, of course, everybody should understand that the Americans try now to boycott the Olympic Games, but even the American sportsmen are against. For instance, last night, yes, I heard this statement made by Eric Hayden, the best American sportsman now. He got 5 gold medals. We congratulate him, of course, on this. And he practically rejected this idea. And he wants to go to Moscow. And so practically sportsmen throughout the world are of the same opinion.
Could I turn to the recent speech by President Brezhnev, who said that he spoke about the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. He said he wanted to state that you would be ready to commence the withdrawal of your troops as soon as all forms of outside interference were fully terminated. Does that mean that there are specific terms for the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan?
No, you know, I think this remark made by our President Leonid Brezhnev is crystal clear.
No, you know, I think it's, of course, a bilateral matter between the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan and the Soviet Union, because we acted in full conformity with our Soviet-Afghan treaty, and of course in full conformity of this Article 51 of the UN Charter. And first of all, these two states should speak about this problem.
But is there a possibility, would the Soviet Union like to be out of Afghanistan before the Moscow Olympics?
Well, it's very theoretical. Again, it depends, first of all, on what our president told. If the Americans and their partners in this case, if they take necessary steps, the problem will be settled very soon.
So you're saying that it could be sooner than some people in this country think?
Yes, yes.
I think it's obvious they're trying to stop us going to the games. Quite simply that.
Will they stop you then now? Does it make it impossible for you to go?
It doesn't make it impossible for us to go. Indeed, it may have the contrary effect to that which the government is trying to achieve. In fact, it may be, as I've said before, it may be counterproductive.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it may bring to the attention of people the injustice that the government is applying in order to gain its way with sport, and it's using sport and using extreme measures against sport. And that appears to be the only weapon in the government's armory against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And we feel in sport that we are being singled out and used in this way.
Well, the first thing that's got to happen is that the Soviet Union has got to withdraw from Afghanistan. After that, I think that a guarantee of the neutrality of Afghanistan, which in essence is a guarantee of the borders, is something which could be achieved. But I think you've got to see a withdrawal first.
Have you had any indication that the Russians might be interested in your plan for a neutral Afghanistan?
Well, there are some indications that they wish to have, wish to talk about things, and there are some indications that they're pretty hard line. I don't myself think that you are going to get a solution to this problem in a short time. I think it's going to take quite a long time. And I think we would be making a mistake if we thought that this was going to be easy. But you mustn't take no for an answer. What one has to do is to go on and on and on and try and get a solution to these problems. And certainly the West must never accept the situation as it now is.
Even the Romanians admit that Bucharest is not the most exciting city in the world, and so the foreign minister took Lord Carrington off to the mountains for their talks. That was to a place called Brasov, 3.5 hours drive away. And during that drive, Lord Carrington got some practical experience of Romanian energy saving.
In the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, the biggest of several special refugee camps which have been set up to house the ever-increasing number of Afghan refugees who have left their homes and crossed the Khyber Mountains into Pakistan. They're being well received here in Pakistan. Each head of family identifies himself to the local Pakistani government official. His thumbprint is taken and he is given money, £6 per month, for each member of his family, regardless of age. The Afghans are also given free food and clothing. It's a gift a country like Pakistan can ill afford. But the Afghans are Muslims, and so too are the Pakistanis, and the bond is a strong one. This government official told me, if there was no refugee camp, I would take as many of them as I could into my own home. Most of the men here have been involved in fighting the Russians, and many carry what has become the status symbol of the Afghan rebel, the Russian Kalashnikov automatic rifle, immediately identifiable by its curved magazine. Each owner of a Kalashnikov, or three, will tell you he took it from a dead Russian soldier. The proudest trophy of war in this camp is this man's belt, the starred buckle, the clue to its nationality. The Russian who owned it, I was told, is dead. The mountains of Afghanistan, so clearly visible in the distance, are a powerful reminder to these Afghans of their homes, and they speak with passion of the struggle which they say they will win, however long it takes. These men, again with their trophies of war, told me the Russians bombed their village with poison gas. It stung their eyes, ears and throats, made them vomit, then knocked them out. At first, they thought it was fatal, because so many people passed out. They say it's the only weapon the Russians have which can flush the rebels out of their favourite hiding places, caves and ravines in the mountains. And when they're forced out, I was told, the Soviet tanks come in. Once they've settled their families, these men will cross the mountains again and fight. The camp itself could be a lot worse. There's a good water supply and the soil is fertile. But coming from the fresh, healthy air of the Afghan hills to the heat of Pakistan has brought dysentery, diarrhea, bronchitis, pneumonia, gastritis and worms, especially to the children. And still the refugees come, at the present rate, up to 1,500 a day. A few men, many orphans and widows. Muslim Brotherhood is one thing, but before long the hard economic facts of housing the Afghan refugees could present Pakistan with a major problem. John Suchet, News at 10, on the northwest frontier. What was until recently a large private house is now an emergency treatment centre for Afghan rebels, Mujahideen, wounded in the fighting against the Soviet army in Afghanistan. By common consent, the main aim of this hospital is to patch up the wounded rebels and send them back into Afghanistan as soon as they're fit enough to fight again. This man was lucky. A bullet from a Soviet rifle lodged in his hip, but the bone was largely undamaged. He told me he'd be fighting again soon. Some, though, will never go back. This woman, from the village of Surhrud, near Jalalabad, was in her home with her family when, 6 weeks ago, Soviet helicopter gunships bombed the village. One bomb alone killed 17 men, women and children, among them her husband and one of her sons. Her other son lost his right leg. Her shin bone was shattered. After the attack, some friends put her and her son on a bed and carried them across the Khyber Mountains to Peshawar. John Suchet, ITN, in Peshawar, Pakistan. Peshawar in the northwest frontier, the operations base for the Mujahideen, the freedom fighters of Afghanistan. Here, reports of the struggle against the Russians are coordinated, and from here, teams are constantly sent across the border. To talk to these men, one gets the clear impression that the Mujahideen, even if they haven't got the Soviet army on the run, are at least holding their own. And it's no thanks to their outdated weaponry. It's due to something much more potent.
We don't think about losing or winning the war. We want to fulfill our duties, and if we are killed, we are killed in the way of God Almighty. So we haven't lost anything. It's a victory by itself. So we are determined to fight to the last.
But the Mujahideen are not quite the organised body they might seem to be. That, where we were just now, was just one rebel organisation. Here, 40 yards down the road, is another. The differences between the groups lie in personal rivalries, not in objectives. These are clear: to rid Afghanistan of the occupying Russians. We asked for evidence that the Mujahideen are holding their own against the Russians. In reply, we were told, if you dress as Afghans to avoid detection at the border, we will take you into Afghanistan and show you the freedom struggle at first hand. We accepted the offer. Dressed as Pathan tribesmen with 2 guides, we walked across the hill range that forms the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We're now a full 2 days' walk into Afghanistan, into the southern hills. Behind me, in the distance, you can see the snow-capped Hindu Kush mountain range. And between that hill fort and the Hindu Kush lie the plains of Afghanistan, the towns of Jalalabad and Kama, both of which within the last 2 weeks have fallen to the occupying Soviet army. Well, we're now just another half a day's walk from Kunar province, scene of the bitterest resistance yet by the Afghan rebels, the Mujahideen. But at this point here, our two guides, having spoken to a lot of men coming towards us from the fighting, have decided not a single step further. The message had been clear. The Soviet army has moved into Kunar province, has taken it and is moving south. At first our guides were skeptical, but the more men they spoke to, the more they heard the same thing. The Mujahideen are beaten and have scattered into the hills. From there, they are beginning the long trek south to the border, to Pakistan and to the safety of a refugee camp. And our guides followed their example. We turned round. The Mujahideen no longer carry their long .303 rifles, so obtrusive not only to the Russian spotters, but to the Pakistani border guards, who will confiscate them if they find them. In the place of guns, shapeless and harmless sacks. For men who have lived in the hills all their lives, the trek is not a hard one. And for a Muslim, the most important ritual in his life can be done anywhere. We came across only one band of Mujahideen still active. There were perhaps a dozen men here, all armed, and all quite sure that within a matter of days they'll be fighting the advancing Russians. So we did not find what the Mujahideen expected us to see. And since communication is on foot, news of the Kunar reverses had not reached Peshawar. The Mujahideen are fighting as they did against the British 100 years ago. They won then, but warfare has changed. John Suchet with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. The biggest piece of Soviet equipment to be captured and brought in is this, a heavy machine gun. The rebels, the Mujahideen, claim they stripped it off a Soviet tank which they knocked out in the fighting in Kunar province. It has pride of place in this gun shop in Dara, whose proprietors still find its workings a little confusing. This gun is on sale to any rebel able to produce the equivalent of £3,000. Apart from that and the more ordinary hardware available in Dara, there's smaller Russian stuff too. These light machine guns recently found their way to Dara, asking price £1,250 each. But the real workhorse of the Soviet army, the Soviet weapon that the Mujahideen have captured by far the most of, is this, the Kalashnikov. The Kalashnikov changes hands for £800, and already the backstreet factories have begun making copies. But, we were surprised to hear, the Kalashnikov is not popular with the rebels. The Mujahideen is basically a sharpshooter, a sniper. He has to be when ammunition is scarce and what there is expensive. His technique is to select a single Russian soldier, then shoot to kill with a single bullet. And for that, say the rebels, there is still nothing to touch the British Lee Enfield 303, a stalwart in World War II and still one of the most accurate rifles in the world. John Suchet, ITN, in Dara on the northwest frontier.
Many people think that the Russian invasion of Afghanistan is more important and more serious than what's happening with the hostages.
It is. One thing about the hostage situation, it's a very, very great traumatic experience for them, for their families, and for Americans who don't like to see that. But unfortunately, too many Americans are concentrating on 50 Americans that are being held and not on the bigger picture of what is happening to the United States and the free world and other areas. What's happening in Afghanistan, what could happen in Yugoslavia once Tito passes from the scene. The fact that the Soviet Union is now acquiring nuclear superiority over the United States. These are the issues that ought to be discussed rather than the hostage issue alone or primarily. And I think that therefore it's very important for us to do what we can to have some way to resolve the hostage issue so that we can concentrate on these other issues that are really far more profoundly important to us and to the Western alliance.
And if after Iran, Saudi Arabia were to look like falling apart, what policy would you suggest the West should follow?
Well, here you can't talk about economic activities against any government that might come there that would be hostile to the West or not dependable. You can't talk about taking it to the United Nations and slapping on the wrist with one of those meaningless kind of resolutions. There's only one thing to do. The West cannot get along without Saudi Arabia's oil. So we move in. The U.S. should move alone, preferably with allies, and I would hope they would join, if not alone, because that supply is essential to the West. I would say in that respect, if the West should lose the supply of oil from Saudi Arabia, it would bring a depression and a recession in Japan, in the Federal Republic of Germany, not in Britain, fortunately, because you have the North Sea oil.
But you would say, therefore, direct military help to the present government in Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely. In the event that Saudi Arabia is threatened by external aggression or by an internal revolt supported by somebody externally or otherwise, and that government, as it would not be able to because their army just isn't up to it, they have the money but they don't have the men, the trained manpower, if they cannot handle the situation, then the U.S. and our allies should go in and help them militarily. We should commit our forces and take the risks that are involved. We cannot allow Saudi Arabia's oil to come into hostile or undependable hands.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
If we could just sit here a moment, sir. Wow.
Sir.
Take a picture. Very good. I'm sorry. People have to look at me now and again.
That's right. You've got to get the other shots.
That's right.
Where they get you on the camera. I know. I've done this before on occasion.
I think once or twice I seem to have read about it.
Not recently. It's a miserable medium. Radio's so much easier.
I know, but
there.
radio is easier to get your serious points across, isn't it? I mean, if you're dealing with difficult subjects, but television is what people watch.
Oh.
Could you just not speak and just... Okay.
The Right Honourable Lord Carrington.
Mrs. Hunter, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps the first thing I should like to do is to congratulate whoever it is who selected this motion. No one, I hope, will disagree with it. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have any value. On the contrary, it's of the greatest importance that we, all of us, in the West, and in particular those who form and reflect public opinion, should make their views absolutely clear. The invasion of Afghanistan is totally unacceptable. And I would like to say how much I agree with the speech made by Mrs. Alford, who introduced the motion. Not a bad understudy, I thought, if I may say so. It's rather nice for me, too, for a selfish reason. It gives me an opportunity to spend a day in this country, which is becoming an agreeable and novel experience. Though some days are more agreeable than others. Afghanistan has for 2 or more centuries been a country in which Britain has had a particular interest. If you remember, in the early and middle part of the 19th century, we were involved in 3 wars. Not because we wished to colonize or subjugate the Afghans, but because of the strategic importance of Afghanistan to India and to British communications to the Far East. Tsarist Russia was expanding. It was only too well known that the Russians had their eye on a warm water port in the Indian Ocean. Such an expansion would have threatened the whole position of India and far beyond. And you will also remember that the result of those 3 wars was an agreement, albeit unwritten, nevertheless an agreement between Britain and Russia that Afghanistan should be a buffer state under the influence of neither, neutral and independent. And for a century or so, until well after the Russian Revolution, that compact, unwritten but scrupulously observed, was kept by Tsarist Russia, Soviet Russia, Britain, British India, Pakistan, and India. And it still stood until about 1970, when, and until that time, neither the Soviet Union nor the West sought to dominate Afghanistan or upset its traditional independence. But then the situation began to change, and we now have the invasion by the Soviet Union of the independent Islamic State of Afghanistan by 80,000 Soviet troops, ruthlessly suppressing the freedom of the people with helicopter gunships and all the modern weapons of destruction and repression. About 1 million Afghans are now refugees in Pakistan. Their livelihood and their very existence impossible under the Soviet yoke and the puppet regime of Babrak Kemal. If we in Britain, in the middle of the 19th century, attached importance to Afghanistan, how much greater is that importance today? All the original arguments are still valid. Soviet Russia is as expansionist as its Tsarist predecessor. And there is one very significant and important new factor. 2/3 of the oil of the free world comes from the Persian Gulf, and all of it goes through the Straits of Hormuz. Soviet troops are now less than 400 miles from those straits, upon the free passage of which depends the economic prosperity and life of the Western world. Now, there are 2 plausible explanations for the Soviet Union's conduct. The first one is that Amin, the ruler of Afghanistan until the 27th of December, a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist, had proved not only inefficient and incompetent, but so repressive and unpopular that such credit as the communists had managed to build up in Afghanistan had rapidly disappeared. The Soviet Union, realizing that something had to be done and faced with a widespread revolt, decided with a massive disregard for world opinion and with that military over-insurance which is the characteristic of all dictatorships, but not our government, to move in and depose Amin and install Babrak. That's the first possibility. Soviet explanations that they were asked in by Amin in order to ensure his own removal are rather unlikely. Or that Babrak Kemal, who was not the head of state and was almost certainly in Eastern Europe at the time, called them in either, is rather, it's so implausible as to be insulting. The second explanation is that the Soviet Union had decided that Afghanistan was now to be part of the Soviet bloc and used as a platform for Soviet expansion in the Middle East and beyond. The dreams of the Soviet Union are perhaps not that much different from those of the Russian Tsars. Now, I don't know, and nor do you, if I may say so, which of those 2 explanations is the right one. But it doesn't matter. The Soviet Union have their 80,000 troops in Afghanistan. The country is being subdued by ruthless and cruel repression. The Soviet Union is 400 miles from the Persian Gulf. the opportunities for military adventure, incursion, subversion and mischief are unbounded. What do the reasons matter as long as the Soviet troops are there? And this is the first occasion since the end of the last war, as Ms. Nicholson pointed out, in which Soviet troops have been used for that purpose outside Europe. Now, let nobody be ignorant of that fact or underestimate its consequences. And I believe that the United States and the West were absolutely right in their reaction to the Soviet move. Indeed, I think it can be argued that there had been too little reaction by the Western powers over Cuban involvement in Angola and the successes of the Soviet Union in taking over the governments of Ethiopia and the South Yemen. Or indeed of their support, their cynical support of the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. How much more important, then, to react strongly in this much graver crisis? We were right to take economic measures, right not to renew the cheap credit agreement negotiated by the Labour government. I have never understood, in my simplicity, why we should give credit on better terms to the Soviet Union than to our friends. We are right to seek tighter application for the rules of the transfer of high technology, and we are quite right to review our relationship with the Soviet Union in the light of its advantages to us and not its advantages to them. And we are quite right, and were quite right, to advise the British Olympic Committee not to send a team to Moscow. To suggest, as I hear so often, that it's wrong to mix sport and politics is to misunderstand the amount of money and effort which the Soviet Union has laid out on those games to ensure a propaganda victory. It is to blur the fact that in the communist world, sport is part of politics. And those, if I may say so, those who believe that sport has nothing to do with politics are living in a dream world. I'm sorry that the British Olympic Committee decided to participate. Perhaps even now, wiser counsels will prevail. A gold medal at Moscow without the United States or Canada or West Germany or Kenya or China or a good many others, is hardly 18-karat gold. But none of this, as Miss Widdicombe says, is enough. We have to take political steps. We have to take steps to ensure the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan and the emergence of a government acceptable to its people. And it was for this reason that I suggested last February in Rome that we should seek to promote a neutral and non-aligned Afghanistan. In other words, to return to the days of the buffer state. You may remember that the Soviet Union justified their invasion of Afghanistan on the basis that there had been outside interference in the internal affairs of that country, and that consequently the border between Afghanistan and the Soviet Union was at risk. A neutral and non-aligned Afghanistan with guarantees of that independence removes any justification for the presence of Soviet troops or for Soviet anxiety about their security. There is no reason why the Soviet Union should not accept this proposal. It will certainly be acceptable to Iran and to Pakistan. It will be welcomed by the states in the Gulf, greeted with relief by the Western world and the Third World, who almost unanimously condemned the Soviet action. I'm glad to say that in these past months, the idea of neutral, non-aligned, independent Afghanistan has gained ground. The European community has adopted it. The United States is in favor. It found favor with the Islamic Conference. A number of third world countries have come out in support. Of course, as Mrs. Faulkner said, it's very difficult, and it remains very difficult to achieve it. There are problems of timing and method. But I do think that the Soviet Union realized that they have miscalculated, that the reactions of the rest of the world have been much more hostile, much more severe than they had foreseen. To be condemned in a resolution at the United Nations by 104 countries is a novel experience for Russia, and not one which they can greatly relish. Nor do I believe that they will find the subjugation of the fiercely independent tribesmen of Afghanistan will be accomplished without much bloodshed and much difficulty. We had some experience of that in the Afghan wars. In response to this Soviet aggression, the West must stand united, and Mrs. Jelly is absolutely right when she said that Europe has to be united and stand firm. We have to encourage the Third World in condemnation and action against the rape of a neutral and independent country. And we must keep our lines of communication open and try to achieve greater understanding. That's why I saw Mr. Gromyko in Vienna at the end of last week. That's why we'll be at the Security Review Conference at Madrid in November. Now, I can't pretend that in the talks I had with Mr. Gromyko last week, our differences were not extensive. But I did make clear to him that if the Russians will accept their obligations to peace, we are determined to renew the quest for détente. And my second point is this. The threat posed by the Soviet Union is only one part of the challenge facing us. The crisis in Iran, the unresolved Arab-Israeli dispute, the continued fighting in Southeast Asia, the problems of international economic recession, inflation, unemployment, the increasing and alarming disparity between the rich and poor nations on this earth, energy problems, nuclear proliferation. Well, that's, I suppose, just a start of what we have to solve. But none of these problems can be resolved or considered in a vacuum. They are interlocking, and the East-West balance is vital, and the direct threat posed by the Soviet Union is bound to influence our attitude to many other problems. But it's equally important that we should work to resolve those other sources of tension in their own right. So let there be no misunderstanding about the determination of the West. We are not prepared to accept the unacceptable. Nor do we believe that what has happened in Afghanistan is irreversible. The message that we send to the Soviet Union is this: we want détente. We want a relaxation of tension between East and West. We want a reduction in armaments. But we're not prepared to pay for it with our security or our principles or with the independence of other countries. Some of us have lived through the well-meaning but disastrous diplomacy of the 1930s. We don't intend to repeat that. Let there be no misunderstanding, and let that be the message from this conference.
For the last year, the team, all university students, have had a Russian coach. He speaks no Pashto, the language of Afghanistan, and carries a gun at training sessions. 10 days ago, he summoned the players and told them they were very lucky. They had been chosen to go to Moscow for the Olympics. It took these 7 a day to decide to leave, as the country's football team did some weeks ago. Now, still in the clothes they borrowed from hill tribesmen and unused to the steam bath heat of Pakistan, They're waiting for arrangements to be made to send them back into Afghanistan to fight with the Mujahideen, the rebels. They told us of the first day of demonstration at the university 6 weeks ago in Kabul. A high school girl waved her green sweater at the Russian soldiers and Afghan police, green being the national colour of Afghanistan. The Russians shot her dead. Other girls took off their veils and waved them at the Afghan police, saying, "Shame on you." The Russians fired again, and 60 schoolboys and girls were killed. This, more than anything, hardened all levels of Afghans against the Russians.
Are you killing them?
Sure.
How?
We can. Nowadays, the people are killing them in the Kabul city, and you can find their heads or arms, etc., in the roads. You can find the dead body of a Russian soldier in a garbage.
With formidable efficiency, the Soviets have ringed the entire Olympic village with 5 separate layers of protection. Outside the wire mesh barrier at 100-yard intervals, soldiers armed with the latest model Kalashnikov rifles. On each side of the fence, an invisible curtain of 4 parallel infrared beams from ground level to shoulder height. So much as a rabbit hopping through will set off a major alert. And inside that, another circle of watchful soldiers, unarmed this time, but each with his own telephone for quickly raising the alarm. To enter the complex, all visitors have to pass through metal detectors and have their baggage X-rayed and searched, a procedure that must be repeated if you go into the residential area itself, protected by yet another line of sentries.
What do we do about the...
Only coming out is easy. Going in, you also have to pass spaniels trained to sniff out drugs and explosives, and closed-circuit TV cameras monitor every inch of ground outside the 18 tower blocks where some 6,000 athletes and officials will live. Every day, new groups arrive to start settling in, and more flags are draped from balconies as they claim their apartments. The latest total of nation-sending teams is put at 89, but a full 40% of those, mainly Africans and Asians, are only here because the Soviet Union paid some, if not all, of their costs. Now a fleet of open buses running round the village perimeter help them find their way around. A few are using this route as an unofficial training ground. Down on the sports field proper, some relax and watch colleagues practicing on the track or indulging in a more thorough workout. Spiritual needs are looked after in 4 religious centres, the first new churches seen in the Soviet Union since the revolution. Protestants and Roman Catholics, in a spirit of unity, share the same room. Next door, a Buddhist temple, its smell of incense wafting gently through a thin curtain to a Jewish synagogue, with Muslims diplomatically given their own room in another distant part of the building. But all come together to eat in one of the 4 vast restaurants, each capable of taking 1,100 people at a single sitting. For those who want to be fed quickly, there's a self-service cafeteria, with chefs all lined up expectantly for their new customers. In fact, keeping it all ticking over needs a small army of 8,000 workers, scuttling in and out of turnstiles at the back. The advance party for the 329 competitors and officials who make up the British team have begun settling into their quarters, have unloaded 7 crates of medical and other supplies, and tested the physiotherapists' couches and equipment. The boycott has meant more room for those who are coming, and British team manager Dick Palmer, who recently went on Soviet television to praise the facilities here, believes that they're the best ever.
Well, by any standards, this is a good village. Facilities are designed really to cater for the needs of the athlete, and it's been built obviously to be used later as a housing complex, but certainly the interests of the athletes have been borne very much in mind.
Would you say it is better than any Olympic facility that we've seen before?
Well, I mean, I don't go back very far, but certainly our medical officer, Dr. Owen, has said that it's one of the best he's been to, and I think he's been to about 12 Olympics.
And like the athletes, the Soviet people who work here are pretty impressed too. Unaccustomed to such a steady flow of luxuries like special Olympic toothpaste or Polish skin tonic, they've been flocking to the village's big supermarket, but they clearly didn't want our cameras to catch them doing so. Major sports firms from Japan and West Germany are busy making up for the absence of their national teams by selling as many goods as possible. For them, as for others, the boycott doesn't extend to passing up opportunities to make money. Whatever the effect of the boycott on the Olympic competitions, it has clearly not diminished Russian preparations for the Games. A fleet of several hundred buses awaits to ferry people to various events, and it's thought that the work they're putting in here will advance the city's development plan by a full 15 years. Martin Lewis, News at 10, Moscow.
The quiet Derbyshire village of Weston-on-Trent is used to being linked with spies. Sited here on an old American air base is the headquarters for the Ukrainian Youth Association of Great Britain. A few years ago, the Russians claimed Ukrainian student Andy Klumchek had been taught to spy here. Now they say it's run by the CIA as an anti-Olympic school. The organisers here mock that allegation and say the only games they're interested in are the ones 400 young Ukrainians will be playing next week when they meet on this site for a summer camp. However, during their stay here, they are expected to attend lectures to hear about the history of the Ukraine and, quote, how the Russians stole our land just like Afghanistan. Just well-known facts, they say, but nothing to do with the CIA. Terry Lloyd for ITN in Weston-on-Trent.
In a large refugee camp for Afghans way up in the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, two Afghan guerrillas, Mujahideen, come to see the most important man in the camp. He's Kashmir Khan, a 28-year-old, the Mujahideen commander for the eastern province of Kunar, scene of the bitterest resistance by the Mujahideen to the Soviet occupation of their country. Kashmir Khan commands 3,000 men. Today, he dispatches a small band of Mujahideen into Afghanistan to fight the Russians. As the crow flies, it's a mere 10 miles. But for the Afghan fighters, it's an arduous 2-day climb into the mountains above the clouds to a height of 10,000 feet. The Mujahideen plan is that from the summit they'll walk down through the pine forests of Afghanistan to the Kunar River, which snakes its way along the bottom of the valley. They'll cross the river and walk on to the fighting, but it won't happen that way. Within minutes of crossing the top of the mountain, MiG fighter bombers carried out an airstrike against a small town on the far side of the river. We were perhaps 2 miles away, but we could clearly see the smoke rising from the disintegrating village between the hills. We watched wave after wave of MiGs come in. The village, we were told, is Shigal, population 20,000, mostly women and children now, and home of Kashmir Khan. Whether you survive an air attack like that is pot luck, and the Mujahideen are used to taking their chances. But if for one moment they thought the Russians had stopped their close surveillance of the area, the misconception was soon put right. We were sent scrambling into cover as we saw a helicopter gunship approaching, the Soviet weapon the Mujahideen fear most, since their only answer to it is to sit as still as a rock and pray. We waited for the telltale smoke to leave the aircraft, sign that we had been spotted and that it had fired its rockets, and we breathed again as it passed harmlessly overhead. And minutes later, a second gunship flying low along the contours of the river valley, giving us the closest look that anyone in the West has had of this Soviet weapon in action. Its task is low reconnaissance, seek and destroy. This helicopter is sweeping the Kunar River to spot any Mujahideen trying to cross to join their colleagues in Kunar, to spot, in fact, just such a group as we were with. By now, the Mujahideen were having serious doubts about crossing the river, and any who still wavered were soon to be convinced as the Soviets continued their parade of hardware past our position. A convoy of a Russian T-62 tank escorted front and back by 2 armoured personnel carriers, each carrying perhaps a dozen soldiers deep into Kunar, where there are still pockets of Mujahideen resistance. For 5 hours we waited in these hills with the Mujahideen to see just such a convoy as that. And yet even when they see it, the Mujahideen can do nothing about it, for if they had fired just one single round from here, that tank would have destroyed our position and us with no problems at all. And what of the Kunar River here below us?
When we left Peshawar in Pakistan, we were told by the Mujahideen chiefs that this river and the land around it had been liberated, that the Mujahideen had won it back from the Russians. Yet from what we've seen today, it's clear to us that this strategically vital river and all the land around it is firmly in the control of the Russians. That fact is clear to us, and it's clear to the Mujahideen too. Pathetically, they are outmatched, outgunned, and they abort their mission. Below them, the stark evidence of what the Russians are doing to Afghanistan. On the far bank of the river, the village of Shinkolak. Once it had 7,000 inhabitants, now the village is abandoned. Its people have fled, and the fertile and abundant yellow wheat fields lie unharvested and will rot. And immediately below us, what was the village of Bashidug. Once it had 2,000 inhabitants, they all fled before the Russians attacked. When the attack came, the Soviet armed forces killed an impressive number of cows, donkeys and sheep, and damaged every house that was standing. And back across the mountain, Kashmir Khan is told that we watched his town being destroyed. And he knows now that if the Russians ever leave Afghanistan, he, like every other person in this camp, will go home, but will have no home to go to. The Mujahideen talk of fighting the Russians, but where we were, it is a phony fight. And the Russians talk of helping the Afghan people, and that is phony too. John Suchet, News at 10, with the Mujahideen of Afghanistan.
Could we just turn to Afghanistan, which you discussed with Mrs. Thatcher? Is it your view that the fighting is going to continue, or do you think that the Russians and the Afghans, the Afghan army will control the whole situation fairly soon?
Unfortunately, I can't do as much as I perhaps like to. But Pakistan itself hasn't got much resources, and therefore we can't give any substantial help. Neither do we want at this stage, because Pakistan cannot act as a conduit for any military assistance inside Afghanistan. But Sandy, I take my hat off to those freedom fighters in Afghanistan. Today, they're literally fighting with, if nothing else, with sticks. And the insurgency has been kept alive inside Afghanistan. This has nothing to do with Pakistan or the bordering areas between Pakistan. It is inside Afghanistan. And it shows the courage and the guts of those people who are literally fighting for their freedom, and I wish them well.
Exactly 1 year ago today, Hafizullah Amin, president of Afghanistan, was executed. He was replaced by Babrak Kemal, appointed by Moscow to head a new revolutionary council. 72 hours before, the Russians had invaded Afghanistan. And this was the problem which faced Amin and which now confounds Babrak Kemal and the Russians. The rebels, the Mujahideen, Afghanistan's holy warriors. They've captured some enemy troop carriers, but they're largely ill-equipped, untrained, sustained only by the belief that they'll ultimately win. The Russians came in to help a bedraggled Afghan army, weakened by discontent and desertions. But at least they had the assistance of Soviet weapons and Soviet military strategy. The theory was that the Russians would help the government forces subdue the major pockets of guerrilla activity. 1 year after they came in, 90,000 Russians are nowhere near doing that, and the Afghan army has dwindled from 80,000 to 30,000. Another problem, the forbidding terrain which shelters the guerrillas and defies many conventional weapons. So the Russians employ MiGs for high-altitude strikes. Having failed to win hearts and minds, they now search and destroy. Closer to the ground, they employ helicopter gunships to get at the elusive rebels. But Soviet tanks and troop carriers control only few parts of the countryside. That remains effectively in the hands of the guerrillas. The Russians may have secured their own frontiers by their invasion, but they have not made Afghanistan safe for communism. And their adventure has been costly. £2,000 million so far, the loss of 3,000 soldiers, and they've put back the clock on détente by 10 years. What should have been an army of liberation has now become an army of occupation.